Shut up and sit down.
88 mile per hour universe, what's up? This is Eric. I am down here in the 88 mile per hour studios in Florida, joined as always by my co-driver, Hans Stuck, the German Shepherd, who is somewhere right about there. I missed it, right about there, we'll say. Anyway, today we are looking at an interesting car. We're looking at a Ford 1976 Gran Torino. Now, this is really only interesting for one reason, which I think is the main thing that you can see here, is because it's in the Starsky and Hutch livery. So that's really why I'm talking about it, why this car is interesting. As a regular car or as a car by itself, the Gran Torino is not very interesting, or not at least the third generation, which is what this is right here. So the third generation on this, they made it from 1968 to 1976. When they first introduced it, the Series 1 was a 68 to 69, Series 2 was a 70 to 71, and the Series 3, or the final run of these, was 72 to 76. Now this one, as I said, is a 1976, but basically from 1974 to 76, they looked more or less exactly the same. Now, they had a little bit of variation in these when they came out in the same series, or Model 3, or Type 3, whatever, Mark 3, whatever version of words we'd like to use. But the main on these, when they were sort of advancing, was the different kind of bumper they had to put on, the big bumper. They had to put on the different bumper on the back for more safety laws, 5 mile per hour hits, things of that nature. They relocated the fuel to a secret little hidden door in the back there. They changed the license plate to the side for the Gran Torino. For the other models, the more base models, I believe they left it in the middle. Now, the interesting thing about the Gran Torino itself is it had, as I said, the different versions or generations of the cars, 3 of them, but inside that, they had so many versions of this car that they offered, with a 2-door coupe, a 2-door convertible, a 4-door sedan, a station wagon, and they had everything under the sun that you could imagine that was in this sort of name under Ford. It was crazy. Now, when this first came out, it was a sub-series of Ford Fairlane, and it was the sort of better, more luxury line of the Ford Fairlane, and then as that went along in 1970, they swapped, and Ford Fairlane became the sub-series of the Gran Torino. So it's interesting how that had sort of taken over and just swapped the generations. Now, these throughout the years have been able to have monster engines in them, 428, 7 liters, Cobra Jet engines, etc. 429 Cobra Jet engines. Now, they had these in the versions for Starsky and Hutch when they first got it. I'm going to sort of jump into that, because that's, as I said, the most interesting thing about this car is the Starsky and Hutch. Other than that, it's kind of, a blah car. It's a beast of a car. Just holding it up in my hand, even though it's a model, it's still pretty heavy. It's 4,000 pounds. Now, if you can see, I'll grab one that I did recently, the Porsche 550. I mean, you can see the difference in the size of this car. Look at how small it is in comparison. And they're scale models, so it's accurate. I mean, this is 1,212 pounds, I believe. This is about 4,000 pounds. So there's quite a difference, as I said. Now, they come with, let's see. When they first did the first Starsky and Hutch pilot show, now if I call this a film, I know they made a film as well years later. If I call it a film throughout, I'm talking about the TV show, and I apologize. It just sort of skips over. But during the TV show, during the pilot, they had 2 different versions of the same car. Now, when they first wanted to have them driving around, they wanted to have them in a Chevy Camaro, but Spielberg, who produced the show, or the agency they were under, was licensed by Ford and leased with Ford to make vehicles. So they went in the lot and sort of picked these with the bright red paint code of 2B. So they had that 2 in the pilot series. The main differences were really just the mirrors. One of the mirrors was a manual set of mirrors, and one of them was a powered set of mirrors. I think they were both chrome plated, and you can see sort of throughout the pilot episode, you can see them riding in the same car, but they're different cars, and that's really one of the ways to differentiate in that. So it's interesting. Also, let's as far as the car itself, what they did to the Starsky and Hutch is 74, 75. 74 is when they put the main line on here, and that's really when it came tuned in. They also, for the TV show, they put air shocks in the back, which sort of gave it a raked stance like that. Now, they replaced it with these five-spoke rims as well, which gave it a little bit more of a beef stance, and they had put bigger tires on it. Now, it was, when it first came out, nobody knew what tires they were, because anything comes out, people want to know all about it. So when it came out, the show in the 70s, people wanted to know what tires were on it, and you couldn't tell because they reversed the sidewall because they didn't have an authorized sponsorship. So actually in one of the scenes, you can see Huggy Bear cutting the brake lines. When he's underneath, you can see one of the inside lips of the tire that reads Firestone. So they did give it away at one point, whether they knew it or not. So that's kind of interesting. So, as I said, the pilot series had the car that had the 351. Both cars had in it. As they progressed in 74, they went with the 400. And as they progressed to 75, they went with, 75, they went with the 460 Lima, and then kept it the same throughout the rest of the show. There was 4 seasons in Starsky and Hutch, and there were a little bit sort of two different slight variations, 3 slight variations of this car as they built it throughout. But visually, it looked the same. Now, Ford realized that it was such a successful show and thought that they should capitalize on the show. And what they did in 1976, they produced 1,000 of these cars as a replica, obviously simulating the show. So they had those for sale. They did not use the paint color to be bright red anymore in 76. That was discontinued in 75. So they brought it back just for this specific replica. They also brought it back so if they ordered cars for the TV show, they would paint it that color for them. They sort of, were cool like that, gave them a deal, not gave them a deal, but they just obviously had that worked out so they could do that. So they did realize what a profit potential that could be and made that replicator, which I think is really cool. And it's interesting to see how, some of these cars take off just because of the TV shows and just the popularity. Now, in the replica, the only option, basically, you could have engine options. You could go for the 351, the 400, or the 460. I believe that was the variances. The 460 in 76, I think the power went down a little bit on that. So different things going on back then with all the different government standards and gas mileage and all that. So it's really kind of almost the best of the worst back then, some of these cars. Now, I'm sorry, they only offered the white interior, as I said, other than the engine options, white or black. So that was really the only options you could get in the replica cars. And the co-star of the show, who played Paul Glazer, sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, Glazer, he played Starsky, and he absolutely hated this car from day one when he was introduced to it. He thought that it looked childish, looked ridiculous. There was no way cops would drive around in that car, and more importantly to him is he hated Fords. So whenever he would drive this thing, he was reportedly said to say, burn it down, or today's the day I'm going to burn it down, and he would drive it into curbs and hit the road rash the tires or the rims out and just do all kinds of crazy stuff on that. So and the guy who played Hutch nicknamed it the striped tomato because he just, that was sort of what he looked like. So they had the nicknames came about. Now, again, in the Starsky and Hutch versions, these cars came with the 2.75 to 1 or 275 to 1 rear ends. And in these one of the stunt versions they had up the rear axle, maybe to a 410. I'm not sure what it was, but who knows. But they upped the rear axle so it could have a lot more grunt at the low end, so they could do stunts, they could get out of places quicker, they could do crazy burnouts, they could have faster acceleration by taking a mechanical advantage of replacing the rear ends in these cars. So it was rumored to have inside the car, it said do not exceed 50 miles an hour, because basically if you did that, you were going to explode the car, and that would not be good. So that was it's interesting how they had different versions for filming. Obviously, stunt versions. They had versions till the end. For the exterior shots, and it's interesting how they just sort of mix multiple cars into one, or we never assume that it's a variety of cars. But this is just a classic I wanted to show you. And it falls in there with a Knight Rider. It falls in there with a DeLorean. It falls in there with the Ghostbusters mobile, where it's just a sort of traditionally normal car or sports car just gets brought to a different level because of a television show or a movie. And other than that, I said it's not really an interesting car. It's just sort of a 70s brick of a block of a car that if you were around back then, it just seemed like these just huge blobs driving down the road that were not very fast, sort of smelt a lot, couldn't get out of their own way, and they didn't really have a lot of appeal. But I mean, it's an interesting looking car. It's sort of right when cars were turning and just becoming a disaster for a while as far as styling and design. But I wanted to show it to you. I think it's interesting. Check out the rest of the shows. We have our main show, 88 miles per hour. We have the car spotting as well. You can check me out at Eric Noni's on Instagram. You can find us at 88 miles or 88 MPH baby on Instagram as well. And check out the show. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Subscribe. Tell a friend. Whatever it may be. For me, Eric, in the 88 Mile Per Hour Studios, and Han Stuck, we are out of here. We will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you soon. Platz, Han Stuck, Platz. Braver Hund.